Well, good afternoon, and to those of you who are guests of Westmont College, welcome. It's terrific to see you here. And welcome to the 15th Annual Conversation on the Liberal Arts, From Inquiry to Impact, Social Transformation Through Liberal Learning. My name is Chris Heckley. I direct the Gady Institute for the Liberal Arts here at Westmont, and we're very pleased to host this conference. I have a couple of comments to set up our time together in a moment. But first, let me invite Westmont Provost Mark Sargent to offer a quick greeting. Mark has been with us now for 4 years and brings to his work an amazing combination of administrative talent and liberal arts vision, for which we are very grateful. So, Mark, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, and welcome, everyone. Nice to welcome you to this conversation. I thought maybe we'd sponsor a quick quiz to see who came the furthest. How about any?
Easy competition.
Is it an easy competition?
No, there will be some
yeah. How about east of the Rockies? Okay. Wow. East of the Mississippi. Overseas? Okay. So somewhere between the Mississippi and the seacoast. Let's just take a quick look where everybody's from. All those hands. Where I know Michigan, right? Right. Although on sabbatical in Arizona, so. Where else are we from?
Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay, great. Minnesota. Anyone else from far away?
Sioux City, Iowa.
Sioux City, Iowa. Well, pleasure to have you all here in Southern California to be a part of this, and thanks for everyone locally that came out as well. I love these conferences because they are really conversations, a chance to delve into issues that matter deeply to Westmont as a place that's committed to the liberal arts. This is a timely conversation because just this fall we launched our Center for Social Entrepreneurship, which is a study program in downtown Santa Barbara. And so we're hoping that the conversation here will enrich some of the ways in which we think about strengthening and improving our curriculum. So we're looking forward to what we can learn from all of you as part of this conversation. And certainly one of the things I appreciate about the conversations is the fact that we're looking to do some form of synthesis between the liberal arts and some other aspect of life and society. In this case, we're looking at ways in which the world of business and the entrepreneurial world can be not set apart from the liberal arts, but be significantly merged, and in that sense, extend the reach of the liberal arts into other aspects of our life. So we look forward to a good time conversation. Thanks for being here, and Chris, let's get us going.
Thank you, Mark. Mm-hmm. So those of you who have been with us in the past know that the Gady Institute is named for former Westmont President Stan Gady, also his brainchild. And it was his concern that launched this effort, concern that there were just too few opportunities for conversation between faith-based institutions like Westmont and a broader community of institutions that have liberal arts at their core. So this event really represents our effort to create space for dialogue about shared concerns among diverse institutions. And what this means really is that this room represents different perspectives, different institutional identities, different locations within those institutions, some faculty members, some administrators, some students. Some of you are practitioners, not necessarily associated with an academic institution, but actually out there doing the work of social change, perhaps grounded in your own liberal arts education. That diversity in this room really is obviously a strength. We can learn from one another, and not just from our presenters, though of course we have much, much to learn from them. That's why this really is a conversation. We want to be talking to and learning from each other. So we've tried to create a format that facilitates that conversation. Each of our plenary speakers will speak for roughly 45 minutes or so. Then we'll take a break, just a short refill your coffee, run to the bathroom kind of break, 5 minutes or so. Then we'll come back together for an extended time of conversation. We'll get all this stuff out of the way, get these two chairs up front and center, have our moderator and our speaker here up front, and talk with each other an opportunity for questions to the speaker, obviously, but also potentially for questions to the room, comments to one another, contributions from all of us. We hope that time will be a time of lively conversation. So that's what you can look forward to in terms of the format of our session this afternoon and in the coming days. One last thing quickly before we get underway. We have had a terrific group of people, faculty members from Westmont, staff members from Westmont, working on this program for just about a year now. So thank you to the members of that coordinating committee, Rachel Winslow, who is the director of our new Center for Social Entrepreneurship, Cynthia Toms, who you'll meet in just a moment, the director of Westmont's global education effort, Rick Ifland, who is the director of our Eaton Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, and Angela Demore, who is the director of our Campus Life office. And also, of course, a huge thanks to Aaron Sizer and Kristen Foll, Gady Institute assistant directors, who did massive heavy lifting to bring this all together. Okay, we've got a great slate of speakers ahead of us. Each of them is uniquely positioned to help us think well about the intersection of the liberal arts and social impact. And here to introduce our first session our first speaker, and to moderate this session is Westmont's Director of Global Education, Cynthia Toms. Cynthia, please.
And although he took some time to thank everyone else, I have to thank Dr. Chris Heckley for all of his work and leadership for years to help us coordinate this conversation. And what a refreshing structure it is to have a conversation and a dialogue. And so I'm excited for our time together today. As Chris alluded to, our time is really aimed at helping to answer the question, what knowledge, skills, and character traits are essential for addressing our most critical social challenges, and how can our liberal arts education help us to develop those? As you'll see in her talk today, Dr. Mary Godwyn, as it's entitled, "The Odd Couple: Can Liberal Arts and Business Management Education Work Together Without Driving Each Other Crazy?" Her work embodies these questions of integration and expansion. She addresses themes of business ethics, inequality, feminist theory, diversity and inclusion, as well as entrepreneurship. In fact, it's hard to imagine any scholar better embodying this relationship than Mary. She's a professor at Babson College, whose central focus is entrepreneurship, and it's because of that, it's landed itself as one of the #1 colleges for entrepreneurial education over the last 3 decades. But the special thing about Mary's contribution in the midst of that is her expertise in integrating the liberal arts into entrepreneurship. Her works boldly have titles that are emblazoned with things like, "Can liberal arts and entrepreneurship work together?" as we'll hear about today, "Ethics and Diversity in Business Management and Education," and "Minority Women Entrepreneurs: How Outsider Status Can Lead to Better Business Practices." Just today, we heard a very provocative lunch session where she shared her most recent book, Ethics and Diversity in Business Management. And she, in that work, explored how different business ethics are understood across cultures. And in more than 17 countries, not only did she interview faculty and students, but she also intuitively listened to who are the author of their textbooks, whose case studies are they using, who's informing the way that they go about business ethics. And she shared those insights. One of the things that I wrote down was this quote: "All of these are pointing to a reality that although profit-driven singularity is still dominant in the business world, the boat is being rocked by people with different priorities who are gaining positions of influence in our world today." To me, what's clear about Mary's work is its insistence that business practice is impoverished without insights and methodologies from the humanities and social sciences, and without consideration of diverse peoples and cultures. And isn't that the crux of our time together this weekend and of this conversation of the liberal arts? Mary Godwyn is a graduate of Wellesley College and Brandeis University. She's received numerous awards. I'll just mention a few here. Most recently, Babson College awarded her recognition as the Nan Langowitz Women Who Make a Difference Award. That was in 2013. She was also the recipient of a Women's Leadership Award, a World Corporate Social Responsibility Congress in Mumbai, India. We have much to learn and gain from our conversation with you today. Mary, thank you for being with us. Please help me welcome Dr. Mary Godwyn.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. So wonderful to be here. I can't even tell you. And thank you so much for coming. I do have a cold, so I'm going to get close to the microphone. If you have trouble hearing me, please let me know. I'm going to start off the presentation in this mode because we have a little sound effect. So I take it very literally that entrepreneurship or business and liberal arts have been considered by many people as the odd couple. They just don't go together. They are mutually exclusive and opposed, and I'm going to argue today that that is far from the truth, and it is to our detriment that we continue to think that. So just to give you kind of the lay of the land of my presentation, I'm going to look at that perception that on the one hand we have these practical skills, these kind of real life on the ground sets of knowledge, and on the other hand we have all the theory and all the ideas. So the business on the one hand and the liberal arts on the other hand. And then secondarily, I'm going to talk about how within a classroom setting we can address and redress this perception. Just very quickly, I'm sure most of you already know that most undergraduate students major in business out of all the business, all the undergraduate majors. And you probably also already know that many schools, and Westmont is one of them, are building entrepreneurship programs. So what we have then is an ability to harness really a movement across educational institutions. Having said that, entrepreneurship as a field, and I really use entrepreneurship to talk about business writ large, because entrepreneurship includes all the business disciplines, and it's an easy shorthand, but we could talk about any business discipline as well, uniquely. Entrepreneurship is an amalgamated field, and that is to say that, yes, it starts often in schools of business, but it uses other disciplines, social science disciplines, etc. And at the moment, it is relatively ill-defined. The goal for most entrepreneurship programs, whether they're regular entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurship programs or a combination, is to make a distinction between entrepreneurs and business owners, to make a distinction between entrepreneurship and business management courses. Michael Morris, who is a leading person in this field from Syracuse University, puts it this way. He says that entrepreneurship is, quote, a philosophy of life, a way of thinking, a way of approaching personal issues, family life, and community involvement. So from this definition, you see, again, the ambition is to make it kind of this all-encompassing, in every aspect of your life, you would be able to apply entrepreneurial thought and action. William Scott Green, who worked with the Kauffman Foundation at the time that he created this report, has another really important thing to say about entrepreneurship in terms of its emancipatory potential. He talks about it as the antidote to alienation in the workplace. That is, when you have your own business, your own enterprise, your own venture, you become one with it, as in a way that as a wage laborer you wouldn't have that option. So he says the entrepreneur is in some sense at one with this enterprise of their own creation. It is then through this activity of creating and recreating the material world that entrepreneurs have a path to self-expression, to changing the world in their image, and to development in a way that you wouldn't otherwise. So really, a return almost to that artisan status that Marx talks about before industrialization. Another quote about entrepreneurship, and this is one of my personal favorites, it is the most empowering, again from Michael Morris, the most democratic, the most freedom-creating phenomenon in the history of the human race. So not to overstate it, but you can see how many people think that at least the potential for this discipline is so exciting and so empowering. Every student, therefore, should be an entrepreneur. Having said that, I will argue that for a number of reasons, entrepreneurship programs have not lived up to this potential. And other things will get critique and scrutiny. I don't pick on entrepreneurship programs exclusively at all. But again, usually these programs are housed in business schools. Usually they are housed in management departments. And so what typically happens is you get these very grandiose hopes and dreams, and in real life, it all devolves into how to start your own business. And other things are not articulated and not practically enforced, unfortunately. And your own business is most often a traditional profit-driven business as well. So I want to turn and look at the potential for liberal arts and entrepreneurship, because so much of the foundation, the hope, the ambition behind these two realms, pedagogical realms, is this idea of diversity, continuing inclusion, progress, emancipation. Again, this potential has not been reached, but if you look at entrepreneurship, you see these are the changes within the workforce and people's lives that we're looking for. Ownership of ideas, bridging of theory and practice, sense of personal agency and self-expression through the work, collapse of the distinction between the public and private, between professional and personal lives, etc. And then when you look at the emancipatory potential of liberal arts educations, and again, I think that liberal arts does open itself up to critique about being education for the elite, being an education for people who don't necessarily have to work or earn money or have an interface in the material world. So there is that critique, well earned, of liberal arts education. However, the potential there, and it has realized this as well, is to be a process of democracy, to include voices, if you look across the 20th and the 21st century, that until recently were silenced. So you get departments, race study departments, and queer theory departments, and environmental study departments, and you see the growing inclusion and diversity in disciplines and understanding and knowledge sets. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that both of these realms have unique vulnerabilities. Liberal arts, when it is not anchored to real world application, can become idealistic and irrelevant. Management education, when it's not anchored to intellectual development and ethical theory and practice and aesthetic considerations, can devolve into alienation and corruption and environmental disaster. So this is the disaster for liberal arts students, and this is what, over the course of the last decade, we've sort of heard over and over in the popular press. What are we doing to these students? We're teaching them how to think, sure, and that's nice if you can afford that luxury, but then what do? They stand out on a street corner, in this particular student, all dressed up, and know where to go, because that's all he knows how to do. He has no real connection to the material world. He can't earn money. He's $25,000, $30,000 in debt, and we have done this student a disservice as those who are committed to the liberal arts. And I have a quote here by Richard Freeland, a fellow Massachusettsian, who talks about the fact that we haven't paid enough attention in liberal arts institutions about the interface between what we're teaching and citizenship and the professions. And I'm going to bracket off the professions and the vocations for a moment and really focus on that idea of citizenship, which of course is at its root what liberal arts training was supposed to be. It was supposed to be training for citizens, thinking, reflective citizens. And I'm going to argue that we haven't done that citizenship training in business schools or in areas of entrepreneurship very much or very well either. So this is a commonality where kind of both of these realms and the integrated realm can do better, can improve. These are a couple of quotes taken from a textbook I am currently teaching, a textbook authored by someone I know personally and like very much. But this course is called Business, Government, and Society. The textbook is called Business and Society. And this textbook, every paragraph or two, tries to describe what the relationship is between business and society. I've just put a couple quotes out here. The first quote says, the relationship is understanding and responding to changing societal expectations is a business necessity. The second quote says, communication with society is a commercial matter. And although I wouldn't say that these quotes are false, what struck me when I read them is that they're incomplete. That for me there was something missing about that relationship between business and society. Here's another quote from colleagues of mine, people I've worked with for years. I like good people. And this is a traditional definition of business, and I will read it. Business is the pursuit of, quote, economic goals, profit, in order to remain competitive in the context of market forces and survive over the long term. And again, I wouldn't say that is a false definition, but for me, something is missing. Something important is missing. So, excuse me, please. To put that quote up again, as I read it, I realize this quote does not make a distinction between legitimate and illegitimate businesses. It does not make a distinction between those businesses that have at least a component of pro-social value and those businesses that are merely trying to make profit. So it doesn't distinguish between car manufacturers and drug dealers, or restaurateurs and human traffickers, or bankers and munitions smugglers. They're all businesses. And if we're not in the position to make that distinction in our definition of business, I think that puts us on really dangerous ground. So this is the worst case scenario for management education. This is a New Yorker cartoon for those of you who can't see it, and I'll read the caption. It's some people sitting around a post-apocalyptic campfire, and the guy in the suit says, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for our shareholders. So you can see where, taken to their logical conclusion, there are really problems with both of these polarized orientations that we can address, I'm going to argue. And one of the people I like so much in terms of his ability to articulate how we might redress this issue is Muhammad Yunus. So he writes, by defining entrepreneur, and I would just say as an aside, we could put business owner, manager, etc. In a broader way, we can change the character of capitalism radically and solve many of the unresolved social and economic problems within the scope of the free market. So what he says is, I see a problem, and he's talking about a social problem. I see a problem, I start a company. So embedded, fundamental to his understanding of what entrepreneurship is that it has to have a component of addressing social ills, of improving lives for people. And these are for-profit. The Grameen Bank, he and the Grameen Bank in 2006 won the Nobel Peace Prize, is a for-profit business. So it doesn't even apply only to nonprofits. He is saying across the board, what if we embed this definition, a pro-social definition, as part and parcel of what we mean by business generally? So this suggests a new theorem for business. If you think about that traditional definition I showed you a few slides ago, it's a reconsideration of relationships, of the interconnectivity between and among individuals, communities, and environmental health. And if we were to structure our understanding of what business is ontologically, what it is, it would inevitably lead to the prioritization of pro-social enterprises. And where best to do this? How can we do this? We bring in liberal learning and the disciplinary variety it offers, and the studies of the interconnected, complex systems that businesses touch every single day. So I want to talk a minute about what I mean by complex. And I found this beautiful structure, and I'm going to present it to you here today. So there's a distinction between simple, complicated, and complex problems. Simple problems. Simple problem is like building a chair. And some people in the audience who are nice enough to ferry me back and forth know that my family and I have moved recently. And we have been building a lot of furniture. You know, you order something, it comes in a box, take out the instructions, you've got, you know, the A's and the ones, and you match them up all together, and you can come up with a chair or a table, thank goodness, pretty easily. I can do it myself, and I have had no training to do it. So that is a simple problem. It's the idea that, you know, without any real skills, you can follow directions and pretty predictably get the end result. A complicated problem is like building the space shuttle. It is really hard. You have to be educated. You have to work with teams of people. There are rigid protocols you have to follow. It's complicated, but again, more or less predictably, we can build space shuttles and airplanes and other, you know, fantastical things that maybe as an individual we couldn't do, but with teams of people, we can pretty much say, yes, we can come up with a successful product at the end. A complex problem is like raising a child. It is tough and new every single day with every single child. Things that you might have tried with other kids can maybe not even not work with this child, but be completely wrong, totally counterproductive. So it's a whole different kind of problem solving. It's looking at interconnected, complex systems all the time. What do individuals bring? How do they interact? It's tough, but not undoable. We do this kind of problem as humans all the time too, with more or less success. We learn and then we relearn. We create and then we recreate. And I'm going to suggest today, this is what business is. It's complex. It's not complicated. And part of the problem is we've been addressing it as if it's complicated, as if it's just protocol driven, as if all we have to do is kind of get a market analysis and a cost analysis and a supply and demand and, you know, run the numbers and voila, everything is okay. And it's in its own little separate realm and isolated from other relationships and other connections. And how do we know it's okay? Because if it's successful, you're making a profit. And a really successful business makes a lot of profit. So I'm going to say that this is an old model that is not working for us very well. And we should change it. So part of what is missing for me in that old model of business as a complicated problem is, what is the meaning of social contribution? How does it add social value? And again, above and beyond the, you know, this is the cheapest I don't know, pair of shoes for the price, really actually looking at a social problem, really actually being bent on improving lives for people. Citizenship considerations, that needs to be a dimensionality of business that people talk about, not as secondary, but as foundational. A critical examination and awareness of the economic impact on large interconnected systems. And it's in liberal education and liberal disciplines that you can start at least studying these issues. So building a caring business in a social context is not complicated. It is complex, it is holistic and multidisciplinary. So how do we do it? This is always the big question. Usually the conversation goes just this far and it drops off a cliff. So I'm going to tell you how I have tried to do it myself as an instructor in the classroom. And the first thing is I orient students to really questioning and changing what we think we know about what we can do. Really, everything is on the table. Press your limits. If you think you know anything, tell yourself you don't. Especially things you think you know the best. So we listened to a podcast, a This American podcast, and I really recommend it. It's called Batman through NPR. You can pick it up online. And this podcast is about someone who has no eyes and has himself created a way of seeing. And at first you think, that's impossible. That's crazy. It could never happen. But I have students listen to this podcast and a variety of kind of multimedia things to kind of shake their understanding of what they're dealing with in the world, to really have them question their most familiar and closely held, well-established beliefs. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to commit to improvement. So no project is acceptable unless students are able to articulate what they have done to find a novel solution and innovate improvement around a social issue. I try to get students to take risks, to, and this is a tough one, to embrace failure. Failure is your friend. And I have a few different techniques to do this, but you know, this is a big hurdle. The other thing is that nothing is left behind. There is no emphasis on the symbolic and non-material and ethical, and de-emphasis on the material and practical skills. It has to be both. So either or choices are not allowed. You have to find a way through creative innovation to get both. We are humans and we are fundamentally material. We need food, we need shelter, and we need clothes. We are humans and we are fundamentally social, and we are theoretical. We have thoughts. All these things together, in combination, in concert, have to work or things aren't firing on all cylinders. Okay, so one of the things I have in the second bullet point is passive students. Students have been taught for many years to sit in class and listen to their professors, silently, often. And so I want a classroom made up of active students, and I want them to know that they have ownership of the class and also responsibility in the class, and that the classroom is an artificial environment. And outside of the classroom, in the real world, is what counts. So they really have to understand the permeable boundaries between our classroom and their projects outside. So I do this in a number of ways. I have put up on the screen the assignments that I build into these classes. Students have a project, and they can choose a project, but it has to be either enterprise or venture development, service activism, or textual analysis. And a part and parcel of this project is students assess themselves and they also assess their peers. So I am not the only evaluator or assessor within these projects. A lot of the responsibility and accountability for projects goes on to students. The other thing I do in almost sometimes every other class, is we do improv exercises. Are people familiar with improv here? Because most of my students walk in and they don't know. I'll say, like improv, like have you watched it on TV? You go to comedy club and they're most like, no, Professor Godwyn, what are you doing now to drive us crazy? But the idea that they build confidence, that they can understand that they can problem solve, that they build community, that they make their partner in the improv look good. All of this helps the dynamic of the classroom to empower students and to give them, again, that accountability, that responsibility. And it's also really fun, because some of what we talk about is depressing and sad, and you need something to make sure that students continue to be engaged and that you as an instructor also continue to be engaged. So we do improv, and students are outside of their comfort zone for sure at the beginning, but I almost always hear by the end of the semester it was one of the best things about the class. So just to look at the enterprise venture design assignment. So I tell students that they have to make an enterprise, a venture. And yes, it can be a business, but can also be an activity. Some students have created clubs on campus, American Amnesty International clubs, or they have created a product, a novel, a screenplay, or they focus on a relationship as their venture. How are they going to change this relationship? But what I tell them is that they have to be change agents. They have to be innovators. They have to be problem solvers. And along with their output, their product, they also have to describe what is the ethical, the social, the aesthetic, and the environmental considerations, that complex, interconnected web of relationships that they are interacting with, partaking with. How do they affect it? And I'm going to show you some sample projects at the end, but the next possible assignment is a service activism assignment. And this can definitely mean, doing volunteer work, and that's nice. And I love volunteer work, and I like to encourage students to do volunteer work, but just volunteering someplace is not enough. So like the venture enterprise assignment, students have to demonstrate that what they're doing is entrepreneurial, that they are creating improvement, that they are working on a social issue, and not just volunteering, but actually analyzing and critiquing the organization that they're volunteering for and leaving it a better place. Textual analysis. This is a situation where students choose a text and apply it to a real world issue. And it can also involve students looking at that text from a different theoretical perspective, reading it, say, from a feminist perspective or a Marxist perspective, or looking at the text from a particular population of people. So going out and interviewing people in terms of what they think of the text. And I will give you an example of that as well. So some student projects from Babson, I had a student group create an art exhibition of children's photography, and these were children from inner city Boston. I had a student group create a soccer tournament, and this was to support an organization that has these tournaments in Africa, in different countries in Africa, to help support AIDS and HIV awareness. The textual analysis, I don't know if you're familiar with this text called How Starbucks Changed My Life. I had some students read this text, and they were so taken with it. They worked at Starbucks, local Wellesley Starbucks, for a month, and interviewed students and other people working there to see if the text reflected their particular experience. And finally, I had a group of students who invited underprivileged youth from a couple of Midwestern states to come and stay with them on the Babson College campus to explore a new environment and kind of get them set up for maybe college interviews and applications. So to go into depth in a couple of these projects, this is the art exhibition, and this is a flyer that my students made asking faculty members and other students and other people from the Babson College community if they wanted to come and look at this art exhibition of the photography of young people. And so they used the text, the Pierre Bardou's text, Cultural Capital and Aesthetic Aesthetic Taste, Artistic Taste, I should say, which is a pretty arcane, very theoretical sociological text. Like, hardly any sociologists even teach it. But so when you talk about really blending theory with real world application, this is a really good example. So my students initially started this project as a service activism project. They heard about an after-school program in public housing in Boston, and they thought, we could volunteer. And we'll work after school with kids, and we'll tutor them, and we'll just, kind of do a good deed, hang out, see what's going on. So that clearly was not going to be enough for the project in this class. But as they got acquainted with the situation, what they really noticed is how different the environment was of the kids in inner city Boston compared to the kind of New England beauty of the Babson campus. And so their next idea to make this more entrepreneurial was to give the kids, the after-school kids, disposable cameras. And they just said, go out and, take pictures of your life and bring them back. So they gave them these cameras and they developed the film, and here are some pictures. And again, you see this juxtaposition between what's going on 13 miles away from campus and what's going on campus. And the more they knew about the children, the more they realized most of these kids had never been on a college campus, were not even imagining college in their future. And most of the Babson students had no idea that this population was sitting there in Boston either. So they thought, why don't we integrate these two populations? And that's why they had this art exhibition, and they invited the kids and their families to come on campus, and they invited people from the community to see the pictures. And so that was kind of a natural ending, but it actually grew from there. It really made people on the Babson campus reconsider the art and the images that we had around campus. So this was like in 2008. And before this, Babson, it's a business college. It's a pretty conservative place in lots of ways, certainly from a conservative origin. So it used to be all men and et cetera. And the campus art was this generic kind of inspirational office art. You've probably seen it, like a lot of people make fun of it now. But it's, so just to give you an example, there would be like a golf club positioned over a golf ball on a tee with the caption, "Go for it." And that was like, but it was all over campus. And so we started reflecting really on the cultural capital of that, the dimensionality of gender and of race and of class, and kind of that unspoken agenda, like who are business people and what do they do, and where do they hang out, and the dean of students at the time just took this bold move, and he scrapped all of that, and they came up with this campaign that the art on campus should reflect the Babson College community, which is quite diverse. And so now the art is predominantly pictures of students with captions about, why they came to Babson or what their education means for them. So again, you see just the faces of the community. So very different. And I give this example just to show you how this is a textually grounded, but also very practical combination. And the impact on the world just kind of kept having a domino effect. This next example is the soccer tournament example. And this group of students used Sherry Turkle's text on sacred objects. I don't know if you know her, but she's a media studies psychologist at MIT. And these are my students from the class. And they found this organization in Africa that used soccer, which is a real community building activity associated with health and high status. They use soccer and the soccer ball to introduce kids to HIV and AIDS awareness. And it is, in lots of communities, taboo to talk about any kind of illness. So the idea is if you can just get people to have a conversation and understand how a disease like a soccer ball can move around and touch different people, even your best friends, then kids would both pick up these practical skills but also have the ability to speak about something that might keep them healthy in the future. So what they did is they built a tournament and they invited. We're right in the middle of Boston, so surrounded by lots of colleges and universities, and they invited teams to come and play. This was in the middle of the winter, so it was inside, and they got a little seed money from Babson to do this. Seed money I didn't even realize they could get. So this was totally student-driven. They go to the administration, we have this really good idea, and they give them money for t-shirts and the space, etc. And they built these teams. These are the final four. And they raised money. And they donated this money to this organization, and they also talked up the cause. So again, a real-world application that came in part through their appreciation of what can a sacred object do, what can it accomplish, not just theoretically, but practically. And this is just this is their slide, by the way. Talking about the soccer ball transcends its traditional meaning and becomes a common language through which these children think with. So again, these projects are supposed to be able to, with textual appreciation, with theoretical kind of idea foundation, address real-world problems and give students experience, fundraising, community building, with teamwork, etc. I just wanted to talk about a couple. I taught this course, or a very similar course last semester at Manhattan College, and just had students came up with some things that were so fabulous. I wanted to share them with you. So one of the things that Manhattan College does, which is truly remarkable, is they have a program at Rikers Island where they take students from Manhattan College into Rikers Island with some of the current inmates, people who are going to be released soon, and they run kind of a bridging course there at the prison. And then when these students are released, they give them a free semester of education at Manhattan College. So again, the one professor runs this, and it's interface between people, the inside students, they call them, and the outside students. And this is fabulous. Just a remarkable and wonderful thing. The problem with this thing is that often after that first free semester runs out, then education is over. For many of these people, many of the people who are now ex-cons. So the student's idea is, what if you were to set up a website? They were going to call it Life Starter, but that name was taken. So Fresh Starter, and it was kind of taking off the Kickstarter campaign website, where they would create profiles of the students who are now at Manhattan College who are looking for funding for their education, little bios, what they wanted, how much money they needed, and they could match them to sponsors and give them a path to continue their education, which would be just a wonderful, wonderful thing. So that was one thing. The other thing is, and I had a lot of good projects, it was hard for me to pick, but the other thing I had students do, and again, started off just like a community service, I will go and volunteer and do something. So I had a group of students go to volunteer at a local food pantry. And I'm always asking students, like, volunteering is good, but what makes this entrepreneurial? What are you going to do to improve this organization? Where is your contribution here? Excuse me. So they started working, kind of found their feet. I have students do at least 18 hours of volunteer work in a semester. And the first thing they did was they surveyed some of the recipients of the food pantry, and it was a rough situation. People will start to stand in line at like 8 o'clock in the morning. Food is given out at 5 o'clock at night. So people are out there all day. They miss the entire day. It is a rain or shine, cold or not. And so that was one huge problem. How can you distribute food without creating this kind of hardship? The other thing that they did was, my students did, and this is Thanksgiving week, I should mention, is they asked for contributions to the food bank, and they said, will you fast for one day and give whatever non-perishable food you would have eaten, will you make that contribution, or will you contribute the money you would have spent on food for one day to this particular food pantry? And they videotaped some of the people. They had fast for a day too, which was a really interesting footage. And then they did a follow-up survey and asked people who had fasted, how likely are you to give money or food to a food bank, considering like a pre and post fasting position? And if you've ever fasted for one day, you know, most people find it to be a really uncomfortable position. You get very hungry and irritable, but it does put you in the shoes of people who are hungry. And 20% of Americans go at least one day without food, which is a staggering statistic. So this was just another of the projects. I also wanted to mention that the focus in the popular press, at least in my reading of it over the last decade, has really been on this issue of liberal arts not delivering these practical skills and liberal arts leaving students in the lurch. And that has put liberal arts people really on the defensive. And we're like, no, we do things, we do good and important things, and let us articulate that and tell you about them. But I also wanted to tell you that, at least in my experience, I hear a lot of business students saying that they are not happy with a business education, that they don't feel like they're getting the choices that they need, and that they are afraid of a lack of meaning in their lives. And I wanted to give you a couple of those quotes here. So one student writes, and I'll read this for the benefit of people who can't read the slides. I was so depressed when I dropped out of accounting last year, but my heart was never in it. Parents always try to push you in the career that will make the most money. By doing what I desire, I will be a better person and make money in the process. Another quote, I want to be able to experience the world, create projects that are beneficial to people, and better yet, become an entrepreneur in my own way. This course taught me to have faith in myself again, and I am so appreciative I was given the opportunity. And again, I have a few more. I would love to be able to help a cause and make a difference while doing something I love. Here is one that actually addresses the practicality of some business courses. All in all, I think this class, and she is referring to this entrepreneurship class, has been the most useful out of all my classes I have taken at Manhattan College. Honestly, when I think, will I need to know the standard deviation of a chart? I don't think I will, but knowing how to think like an entrepreneur is something that I know I will use every day. And finally, this moved me especially, I realized that the world does not revolve around me. And there are problems in my life. That may seem too big for me, but relatively it's nothing compared to what the poor and hungry are going through. So this real sense of the interconnectivity, of being one among many, of having a degree of social responsibility and accountability, of seeing yourself as part of a community, is what we can offer students in these integrated courses. So I just wanted to say that I think integration should transcend the idea of giving students practical skills. It should transcend the idea of when students graduate, they will be able to get a job. And this is what I hear over and over and over again. Can I get a job? Can I get a job? But the real ambition should be to put students in the position to create meaningful work, to create jobs, to be the definers of the workplace and of the future. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Mary, you've certainly given us a lot to think about. I personally feel inspired about how we link the emancipatory power of entrepreneurialism and liberal arts thinking. We're looking forward to continuing this conversation, but I do want to just thank our speaker today with a round of applause. We're going to come back in 10 minutes, so that's 4:37 if you are a close timekeeper. There are restrooms just out to the left of this room in the hallway. There are snacks and coffee. Please be thinking about your questions, and we're going to engage this conversation and go deeper. So be sure to come back. It's going to get even better from here. So thank you, and see you in 10 minutes.